Hello, good morning, everyone, or afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to our Full Steam Ahead webinar. If I haven't met you before, my name is Vanessa Robertson. I'm the Director of Policy and Education at Geothermal Rising, and I'm delighted to be your moderator today. We have some amazing students that are here with us today, all of which were recipients of our Marcelo Lippmann 2025 scholarships. So before we introduce them, I do have a few announcements. We really just want to thank our Earth Energy Visionary members, our Geothermal Champion members that allow webinars like this to happen, that allow us to spend time on curating this content and supporting initiatives like these students. So thank you very much, all of our members. And we do want to make sure everyone knows this is the time of the year for renewing your membership. So make sure you lock in those membership rates. If you're an organizational member this year, you can get that 2025 pricing for 2026 and reach out to our amazing membership team, Carrie and Cam, for more information. And we also just want to make sure you are aware of all of our incredible events coming up in 2026, from our thermal energy networks to our investment forum to Capitol Hill Day in DC and our Indigenous Geothermal Symposium in Calgary as part of the World Geothermal Congress. And of course, save the date for Geothermal Rising Conference in Houston. It is a little bit earlier. It is end of September and not end of October like normal. So make sure to go to our website and more information and to register. So. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our first student. Daniel Akimi is a graduate student in geophysics and seismology at the University of Houston. He has established a career in exploration geophysics, holding both a bachelor's and a master's degree. He will present chapter 1 of his dissertation on geothermal prospectivity in the Hutton Sandstone of Australia's Eromanga Basin, an area with some of the hottest basement rocks in the world. Despite past exploration, including an early well that did not flow as expected, the region still shows promise. His study combines geologic and thermal analysis to reassess the Hutton Sandstone's potential for viable geothermal development. Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction, Vanessa. I am honored to be here and share my research with you. Because of time, I will jump straight into the presentations. So my research is tied to geothermal energy, prospectivity in the Hutton Sandstone Cooper Eromanga Basin in Australia, providing insight into the reservoir quality distribution using quantitative seismic interpretations. Like I said, because of time constraint, I will only be presenting a portion of my research. Um, so is the presentation outline. I'll begin by explaining why Australia is our focus for geothermal energy exploration. Then I will walk you through some of our research questions, key results, and conclusions. Why do we have to look at Australia for geothermal energy exploration? Australia, as a country, hosts several basins, most notably the Cooper Eromanga Basin, that contain some of the oldest and hottest uh, basement rock with radiogenic heat production value exceeding 5 microwatts per cubic meter, making them highly promising for geothermal exploration. Uh, this figure is an interpreted temperature map at 5 kilometer depth, showing value ranges from about 85 degrees Celsius to 235 degrees Celsius. With the Cooper Eromanga Basin, standing out as a major geothermal hotspot in the basin. This map is this map showed the geothermal gradient of the Cooper Eromanga Basin at a depth of about 2.5 kilometers, and it shows a geothermal gradient in the region, geothermal gradient between 34 degrees Celsius per kilometer to 53 degrees Celsius per kilometer. And Napamari Trough, in the southern part of the basin, display the highest geothermal gradient, making it the focus for this study. Yeah, the Cooper Eromanga Basin are located in the east central part of Australia. This figure shows uh, the structural elements, including the two major troughs, the Peshawara troughs, as well as Napamari troughs. And this figure shows the stratigraphic column of the Cooper Eromanga basins. It contains some key formations, including the Peshawara formations, Tulashi formation, Napamari group formation, Orti sandstone formation, Namo sandstone formation, Adnaowi formation. But this study is focused on the Orti sandstone formation, which is braided fluvial formation. Time will not permit a detailed review of the research problem, but previous attempts, including the Habanero for enhanced geothermal system, as well as Celsius well for hot sedimentary aquifer geothermal system has been unsuccessful. So, but with no commercial geothermal exploration production to date in this basin, the study is aimed to provide new insight into their geothermal prospectivity. This study addresses 4 research questions based on the identified problem. However, I will be showing the result for question 1, which is, despite the failure of both the enhanced EGS and HCS geothermal system, is there still a suitable location for geothermal exploration in the Napamari Trough? Here are some of the data I used for the study. Bottom hole temperature, well log from 50 wells, formation types, production data, and pre-stack seismic data. So I'll briefly walk you through some of the results, including petrophysical evaluation. So the figure shows the log plot of the 5 formations evaluated before we apply the cutoff. This includes the Shawara formation, the Tulashi formation, the Napamari group formation, the Orti sandstone formation, as well as the Namo sandstone formation. And this figure is arbitrary cross-section from the southeast part of the field to the northwest part of the field, with all the key surfaces we analyze. Then also the red line shows the 120 degrees Celsius horizon, which indicates that the Namo sandstone, which is the yellow line, is at the boundary of the 120 degrees Celsius temperature window. Although both Peshawara formation, Napamari group formation, and Tulashi formation reach the required temperature, but their net sand thickness are very low, and as such, they are too small to support effective heat flow production. But Orti sandstone formation, which exceeds 120 degrees Celsius, as well as the ISS sand thickness that is greater than 60 meters, is the best for this study and make it the optimal target for this study. Here's the temperature map of the Orti sandstone formation, and temperature ranges from 60 degrees Celsius to about 140 degrees Celsius. As we move away from this Napamari trough, temperature dropped to as low as 100 degrees Celsius. And as we move towards the east of this Napamari trough, temperature dropped to about 70 degrees Celsius. This figure is this figure shows the latest stratigraphic cross correlation of the Orti sandstone formation, which is predominantly sandy, and it exhibits shrunk lateral continuity with an average gross thickness of 130 meters and a net to gross ratio of about 80%. Yeah, one of the major highlights from these figures is that this particular well, Gashna 01 well, which has temperature that exists 120 degrees Celsius, has better reservoir properties than the previous well that was drilled, which was not successful. All the thermal property maps, including net thickness map, rusty maps, as well as brine heat flux distribution, indicate that Gashnit 01 well is characterized by a better thermal characteristic compared to the previously unsuccessful Celsius 01 well, which lacked favorable flow properties. This figure shows the probability classification map for the prospective area within the Earthen Sandstone Formation. And table 1 and 2 summarize the key input, the output, as well as the elements used in the prospect ranking. And from the ranking of the integrated property, we identified two zones, the P90 zone as well as the P10 zones. But the P90 zone represents the most favorable regions where we have high confidence and highest chance of success. And coming back to the research question number 1, despite the failure of both EGS and ACS geothermal system in this basin, is that a suitable location for geothermal exploration in Napamari Trough? Yes. According to our analysis, Gashnao 1 well possessed the right geothermal gradients and with a better chance of success compared to the previously failed Celsius 1 well. And these are some of the key points from the study. These are some of the recommendations. Time will not permit me to go through it. And I would like to appreciate the following people for their contributions and their input. Thank you for listening, and I would like to take your questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Daniel. Really appreciate that presentation. And I'm sure, yeah, there's a lot more data in there that folks might be interested in hearing a little bit more about. Maybe at a further time, we can follow up with your email, and if folks are interested in that. I'm trying to look at the chat real quick and see um, what which kind of geologic or thermal indicators were most important in assessing the Hutton sandstone's viability?
Yeah, so we actually look at two major criteria. So the temperature as well as the net sand thickness. But we also look at both porosity and also the permeability. And you can see from this graph, so this is uh, the bar chart showing the porosity values for the Orton sandstone formation across the 50 wells we analyzed. And also this is the permeability. But majorly the petrophysical parameters like the porosity and permeability are so important that we also look at the water saturation, then also we look at the temperature.
Nice, great.
Yeah.
And how would your findings guide future geothermal exploration strategies in Australia or in other similar basins?
Yeah, so time just that time did not permit me, right? So here is Cooper Eromanga Basin, like I showed previously. You can see it is kind of hot spot in terms of the temperature. Temperature is so high. So, and also there has been a lot of so they started by trying to drill for enhanced geothermal system, which is a Banaro well. They drill about 5 wells, which were are not successful. And most of the issues is related to the water loss into seismicity, and also probably it's really very expensive. So they moved to like enhance the earth sedimentary aquifer. So to drill this particular well, but unfortunately, the problem has been like they they saw a low flow rate than they expected, and that made them to lose money, and the well has to be abandoned. So with our research, with findings where we realize that, okay, this area, of course, we are trying to understand why we have a very localized porosity in this particular well, because this well is producing oil and gas, it's producing gas. This well is also producing gas, and it has the right porosity and also the permeability. So we're just curious to know why we have this localized porosity. But we try to search around the whole basin, and we realize that this area has the right temperature as well as it has the right petrophysical property that can be developed for geothermal exploration. So we'll be able to present this at the conference, and we are trying to, convince investor to revisit this basin for geothermal exploration.
Wonderful. And one
Mm.
last question. So, how did you estimate 5 microwatts radiogenic heat production, and how did you isolate radiogenic heat components?
Okay, yeah. So we made reference to a study that has been done in that particular basins. So we did not actually do the calculation, but we also try to confirm that result by using a thermal modeling. Like I said, this the time constraint will not allow me to show some of these results, but what we did was thermal modeling and also the maturity modeling to actually see uh, the heat capacity of the basin. But also, it has been reported in the literature, like if you read some journals about it, some study that has been done. But what we did was we started by trying to see if we can get the exact value that has been reported. And what we did was to, use thermal modeling to estimate the RHP values for this basin.
Great, fascinating. I am not the geologist on the geothermal rising team, so I'm always fascinated by all of your guys' research. And I also stopped at my
Yeah,
master's and not and my PhD. So yeah, I'm always blown away by the level of detail you all go into. So thank you very
yeah. So
much,
one
Daniel.
Yeah, so one of the things that's also stand out is when you see this particular trough, right? So there has been like igneous intrusions that's, very close to the surface. It's at the depth of about 4 kilometers. And that actually, made the RHP value to go high. So there is, in this particular trough, you can see that is where we have the highest temperature. So below this trough is a magnetic intrusion, igneous intrusions which made this the sedimentary rock that was deposited on it to have that such high heat and RHP value.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Daniel. Best of luck in your continuing education. Okay, so
Thank you.
next up, we have Aaron Baxter. Aaron is a fourth year PhD candidate at Cornell University who graduated from Case Western Reserve University in 2022 with a BSc in chemical engineering. Driven by a passion for clean energy transition, his research focuses on the development and characterization of novel engineering solutions to increase the thermal efficiency and lifetime of geothermal systems. Thank you, Aaron. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. And as she said, I'm a fourth year PhD candidate at Cornell University. And so today I'm going to be talking about some of the work that we've been doing at Cornell. It's in response to a project where we're looking at thermally responsive microgels and their potential for geothermal reservoir management. And this is a highly multidisciplinary project. I specifically work on the rheological side, but given the short amount of time, I'm hoping to give a nice brief overview. And we won't be able to get into too many results with the short amount of time, but if you have any questions about our results, feel free to send me an email. And we're also in the process of submitting a couple papers in relation to this project. And so the entire motivation behind this project is that every geothermal system faces the inherent risk of premature thermal drawdown. And one of the primary contributing factors to this is the possibility of a formation of a geothermal short circuit. And so you can imagine in a geothermal reservoir in a fractured system with a very heterogeneous fracture aperture, you can get these much higher aperture regions, which can really serve as a low impedance area where you're seeing a lot of flow rate, and they really act as a thief zone. And so you get this high flow rate in these high aperture areas, which have an overall low heat transfer area. And they're really just stealing away the flow. You're hoping that you get this widely distributed flow that can access all of the reservoir's heat transfer area. And so we wanted to find a way to basically eliminate these thief zones. And so if you look at the kind of simulation we have at the bottom left here, this is actually a top-down view of a real system in northern New York. It's scaled up from a 14-meter well separation up to 1,000. And the reason we chose this field was because it's known to have this really quite prominent fracture between the injection and producer well, where we know we're going to get this type of short-circuiting behavior. And so what we do is we make a few assumptions. We assume the rock begins at, say, 200 C and inject at 50. And we're going to continuously circulate fluid for 30 years and just see what the heat map looks like. And so you can see, if you can see my mouse, you get this ultimately linear short circuit formation in this predominant fracture where we're basically after 30 years injecting cold fluid and producing cold fluid. And so what we wanted to look at is if we were to adjust the simulation such that each node in it, if it drops below a threshold temperature, here we chose 190 C, that if we reduce the aperture there artificially by, say, a factor of 40, we're basically increasing the resistance in these cold short-circuited regions and forcing fluid to flow around it and become redistributed. And so what we can see is we get a much more widely redistributed flow, and the impact that this has on our production well temperatures is significant. We have drastically increased thermal performance over the entire lifetime of the reservoir, and we can drastically increase the lifetime of that reservoir. And so the question is, this is all simulation. How could we actually implement that in the real world? And that is where we introduce these thermally responsive hydrogel microspheres, we're calling them. And so if you look at the video, as it suggests, these particles actually undergo a volume phase transition with respect to temperature. And it's a counterintuitive one. So at low temperatures, they actually exist in a swollen, expanded state. And at high temperatures, they shrink down to this shrunken state. And this happens due to a switch in the network from switching from a hydrophilic to hydrophobic state as a result primarily of this NEPAM monomer. And another important aspect of this is that we can actually control the temperature at which this switching takes place through the co-incorporation of sodium acrylate as a co-monomer. So if we increase that sodium acrylate concentration, we can actually increase the temperature at which this volume phase transition happens, and this can serve as a tuning mechanism. And this process is fully reversible as well. And so our hypothesis behind this is that if we were to inject a concentrated pulse injection of these particles at a high temperature, so they're in their shrunken state, they'd be able to enter a reservoir, and once they get into these colder, short-circuited regions below whatever our designed threshold temperature is, they'd be able to drastically swell up and increase the volume fraction of the suspension in those areas, and ideally actually become a yield stress fluid, or at minimum forming a highly viscous fluid in those areas. And rheologically speaking, what we want to happen is we want to have the formation of this yield stress fluid through an increase in the volume fraction of our suspension, which is inherently coupled with temperature. And so in this image I have up here, this is actually a 2D cross-section of one of these suspensions, and you can see it's not so far-fetched. These really can concentrate themselves into these high-packing suspensions that can really withstand some force. And so to better study this, we actually built our own custom setup. This is actually a custom-built Couette cell, which we can hook directly in line with a rheometer so that we can perform macroscopic measurements. And so the entire idea is a Couette cell. It's basically a cup-in-cup geometry. And we would put our suspension in the gap between the rotor and the Couette cell, and we can shear the material and get a lot of the rheological properties, as well as actually being able to visualize the system as that video shows you. So what we do is we actually use a laser and produce a vertical laser sheet coming in the one side, and then we have a camera at a 90-degree angle so that we can get this 2D cross-sectional view of our fluid under flow. And this enables us to actually understand the local behavior of these suspensions and extract a lot of the rheological properties so we can get a full understanding of them. And we can fully do this at a variety of temperatures as well, so we can understand the temperature-dependent rheology of these suspensions. And so here I'd like to show you a nice demonstration of this volume phase transition undergoing in a dense suspension. And so what I've done here is, this is in the setup I showed, I purposely concentrated the suspension very densely such that it actually trapped air bubbles, showing that we have a yield stress fluid. And I'm going to increase the temperature of the system such that they shrink. Some of the particles will go to the top with the bubbles that rise. Some of them will go down to the bottom. And then I will bring the temperature back down to show that it can return to its initial state. And hopefully this video plays well across Zoom. And so the nice thing about this, that since it's fully reversible, is that if we were to introduce this into a system where it says, we say we jam these cold short-circuited areas, If we wanted to leave the system and allow it to thermally recharge over time, the suspensions would naturally unjam themselves over time as they get heated, as they'd shrink and be able to get extracted from the reservoir. And so, with that, I'd like to thank the entire team that's been working on this, as well as some of our additional collaborators, as well as funding support from the Department of Energy and NSF. And I'd be happy to take any questions from the audience.
Wonderful. Thank you, Erin. That was fascinating, and that video worked perfectly. I kept on wanting to see it all over again. Uh, Perfect. Just looking at the chat real quick. But I've got a question. So what are your next steps for testing or scaling this technology?
Yes, so as I said, we're in the process of submitting a couple papers now. So we've done a pretty thorough investigation into the temperature-dependent rheological behavior in this setup I've been working with. We've also done a lot of work into the synthesis of these materials, making sure they have the right volume phase transition temperature as well as desired mechanical properties to ensure they survive a geothermal system. Next steps we're really looking at is we're actually building kind of a meter scale apparatus in granite with a pretty heterogeneous fracture aperture so that we can actually test these systems with realistic substrates at highly elevated temperatures and pressures to see how they react.
Fascinating. And then you had mentioned, this working for EGS. Is there, we've got sedimentary or super hot next generation technologies. Do you have ideas on, one that might benefit most from your innovation?
So right now our focus has definitely been in kind of the EGS, particularly since we're up in Cornell, northern New York. We don't have particularly hot rock over there. So Cornell is actually looking at hopefully starting to use a geothermal system for direct use. And so right now our studies have really been looking at temperatures relevant for, say, a direct use reservoir. So less than 100 C, maybe around 60 to 80 to C is where we make our cutoff of maybe we want to start plugging short circuits there. But these gels certainly can get to higher temperatures than that. And that's definitely an area for future focus if we wanted to start looking at higher temperature systems.
Great. And then another question is, are you concerned with any potential complications with induced seismicity or groundwater leaching?
Yeah, so that's actually kind of another area of the project we that not necessarily for flow control of short circuits, but it's actually been proposed another use for these gels is to kind of prevent leaching of water in outside of the system, and we could actually use it for kind of plugging the exterior of these reservoirs to prevent water loss. We've really it's early state of anything like that, but it's certainly something to look into.
Fascinating. Well, thank you again very much, Erin, for all your work. Love to come. I've been wanting to go out to Cornell and see everything going on there. So you got a great department there, and yeah, congrats.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, so next up, we have Ayat Al-Asadi. Ayat is a second year PhD student in civil and environmental engineering at the University of Utah, specializing in numerical modeling of hydraulic fracturing for enhanced geothermal systems. She previously served as a job delivery lead in drilling and measurements at SLB and earned a master's in petroleum engineering from the University of Wyoming as a Fulbright scholar. Welcome, Ayat.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm very happy to be here today and present some of my work that I've been doing in the last year and a half about geothermal energy. Here I'm going to present um, one part of our research that we are just submitted the paper for, which is the numerical and experimental study for the shape effects of the mechanical behavior of particulate packs or proppant under different loading condition. So this project is actually
Real quick, sorry, Ayat, will you share your screen?
oh You don't, oh, sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Didn't want you to get too far into it because
Yeah.
thanks.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. I think I got drawn with presenting. Yes. There we go. Do you see it now?
Sure can.
Okay. Good. So yeah, I'm going to present part of our research about the particle shape effect on the mechanical behavior of particulate pack, and I work with Dr. Sharzad Rashanka, assistant professor at the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at the University of Utah now. This project actually is part of a Utah Forge funded project that's a joint venture between three universities, University of Oklahoma, University of Utah, and Louisiana State University. And our part is actually focused on the numerical modeling for a new developed proppant that we hoping to develop for the Utah Forge project. For my part, for the numerical modeling, I use discrete element method, and I kind of splitted the work frame of the numerical modeling to three stages. We are at stage one now, where we study the particle size distribution and shape on the mechanical behavior of particulate pack or proppants. Later on, we were hoping to add the breakage effect, and in the later stages, we will add the high pressure, high temperature effect to mimic the geothermal reservoir conditions. For my part so far, what I did some experimental studies to obtain some data for my numerical models. I used to do that, I used a PLA materials, which is a 3D printed particles that we manufactured and design in our university. The whole purpose of this material is that we can study the shape effect that I'm going to discuss today on the mechanical behavior. The experimental studies that we did, they are two type. One is a vertical loading, which in civil engineering we call it odometer. So we load the particles vertically under zero strain. And then we did load them in shear condition, which is in direct shear test loading frames. And then we use the discrete element method and the Itasca PFC platform to build up our numerical models. Since we are using a granular material type of loading, we used a contact model between the particles, which is the Hertzian contact model based on the nonlinear elastic models, knowing that we're not gonna model any fracture at this stage. And we came up with the three shapes to study the effect on the mechanical behavior. We have spherical, angular, and elongated particles. These are all driven from a spherical shape, but stretched along their principal axes. Upon calibration, the result we did, or the result we get, is to compare between the different shapes, and we can see under vertical loading, we have the spherical particles show the highest stiffness compared to other shapes, and they also retain the highest permeability compared to the non-spherical particles. So they lose only about 57% of their permeability, up to 4 megapascal, compared to the elongated that they lose around 66% of their porosity. Under shear loading spherical particles, they show a lower shear strength compared to the non-spherical particles, that they continue kind of to shear or to build up strength upon shearing, but at the same time they are more showing more dilative behavior throughout the shearing process. Here we see I'm showing how different contact network between the particles at different loading condition. So under ODT or odometer loading, we see that on the far left, the spherical particles, they maintain a widely spreaded, a uniformly distributed network. That means all the forces upon loading are distributed evenly throughout the pack, compared to the non-spherical particles that they kind of show a less uniform, a less strong contact network compared to the spherical. When we compare the same, but for shear condition, we see that the spherical particles, because they are able to roll, they are resisting the tendency to form. Let me try to. Yeah, they are resisting the tendency to form a more skeleton shape against the shear direction. That mean, and this is how we saw it's reflected as a lower shear strength and dilation behavior. When we compare the two, we find out that we can answer that the spherical particles, they appear more promising as a proppant at this stage because they show or retain a higher permeability compared to other particles. They show a lower compressibility under vertical loading, and they show a higher dilation under shear. However, with all of that, but we know that the spherical particles, they are more born to breakage compared to the non-spherical particles. And the larger they are, the more they build more tendency to break. That's actually our way forward, that we do want to include the effect of breakage to see if our answers still hold true, especially under high pressure, high temperature effects. So far, these are our publications. We published one study about the particle size distribution effect and another study that's still under review for the shape effect. Hopefully that we get it released soon. Thank you so much for listening, and if you have questions, feel free to ask or contact me or my supervisor, Dr. Sharzad Rashanka. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ayat. They're just doing such incredible work out in Forge. So it's exciting to be a part of such an amazing collaboration of entities, of universities and Department of Energy. We're pushing for some policy to hopefully get more Utah version forges out in different areas of the country so we can start, exploring different subsurface areas. So looking at the chat, the questions real quick here. So did as you're you were studying, the particle shapes and everything, did any of them really like surprise you, behave differently than you were kind of expecting in those simulations?
First of all, the particles that we're studying are not the same particle that we're developing for that project at this point, because this is ongoing work. So we didn't come up, or the university that working on the building the proppant, they didn't come up with the final manufactured proppant. So we kind of had to find out to have our models ready to test those new proppants. But the one that kind of surprised me is like when they become non-spherical, whether how different shape they are, they kind of don't show a lot of difference in the behavior. I was expecting at least, different shapes, different non-spherical shapes give different behavior, but they kind of show the same behavior under different loading condition. That was something we didn't have in our hypotheses at the beginning.
Great. This is a little bit more kind of career question for you, but you worked in drilling and measurements at SLB, so I'm just curious, how does that field experience influence now your academic research today?
I worked in the field mainly with SLB, and I've been working in such a polluted environment, I would say, for 4 years almost. And knowing how that actually affect the environment in my own country where I come from, and the fields that I worked in, that was like a huge driven for me to move into geothermal when I was even in my master's, I did some geothermal work. So that kind of what helped me to choose geothermal, and I'm so happy that I did throughout the years. And hopefully I can contribute enough and keep working in the industry, but however, this time with geothermal.
Wonderful. Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Ayat,
Thank
and
you.
best of luck. I do have one question at the very end that I'm going to ask all of the students once we get through our last one, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Okay. Last, but definitely not least, happy to introduce Michael Natzler. Michael is pursuing his master's in Beijing, focusing on the development of geothermal power and district heating in China. Beyond China, Michael is interested in the politics and international dynamics of the geothermal industry. Today, Michael's presentation will outline some key trends in geothermal in China and its relevance for global geothermal developments. Thank you, Michael.
Sorry, just getting myself off mute. Um, and is that coming through now in the, I'm
Yes.
going to put it, and is that in the, is this in the, you can see this clearly?
Perfect.
Fantastic. Okay, well, thank you, Vanessa. That's been really interesting hearing all the other presentations. I'm Michael Natzler. I've been studying in Beijing for 2 years at Peking University, focusing on the international politics of geothermal, specifically focusing on China. Just as a little background, I'm not a geologist. I didn't do a bachelor's degree in science at all, but I found my way into this industry mostly through moving to China to try and pivot into the energy industry after a few years working in policy and strategy consulting. And I thought I'd share this just as the industry accelerates and expands. It's great to see people from lots of different quarters as part of it. And hopefully in the future, we'll keep on working in geothermal where there are roles which are available for non-geologists. But so far, it's taken me to lots of really interesting places, the IEA, and most recently a short stint at Baseload Power Taiwan. But yeah, if you hear of anything, I'd love to hear about the opportunities. Um, I'm going to run through a few topics today. First of all, sort of a framing of international relations and geothermal. When I started, there really wasn't any attention paid to this issue, and increasingly that it's coming more into the news as I'll touch on in the presentation. So I'm extra grateful to Geothermal Rising for giving me a grant so I can work on this, as it's not a broadly recognized topic or theme. And then with the rest of the presentation, I'm going to have a quick look at China and US geothermal industries as they're two really important ones, and the two countries have a really important relationship in international relations. And then finish on some work in progress on how my research on China maybe questions some of the narratives around the US-China dynamics, sort of in relation to geothermal. So I moved to Beijing in September 2023, and at that point, I had never really heard or understood anything about geothermal energy. So I remember the first podcast I listened to was Redefining Energy, which was released on the day I landed in Beijing for the very first time. And at that time, it was a very exciting time in China in energy and geothermal altogether. And this really informed my decision to try and understand geothermal better in China and its international relations. So at that time, there was rapid expansion of solar PV and electric vehicles coming out of coming out of China, which was sort of amazing the world. And then later that year, in November 2023, I believe, there was the Sunnyland Statement, which was sort of a high ebb in US-China relations after a long period of distrust and sanctions, where President Biden and Xi Jinping met in California, and importantly, they agreed one area of cooperation, which was carbon capture and storage. And so when I decided I thought I wanted to research geothermal in China, this was very much the framing for it. The two largest polluters in the world were finding a way forward on some sort of small scale fringe energy technologies related to the climate transition. And in the back of my mind, I thought, well, maybe geothermal fits into this in some way. But there was very, very little content on Chinese geothermal industries at this time, and to this day, there's relatively little. Even this fantastic guide to Chinese policy, geothermal is mentioned a few times, and largely in footnotes, as people who read the IEA will also often complain that geothermal doesn't have its own section. So this was the setting to which I came to the topic. So in light of that, I wanted to understand US and China geothermal, and how the two countries related to each other. And very clearly and neatly, perhaps simplistically, a clear picture emerges, which is that where the US is a world leader in geothermal power installation and technology and R&D investment, China at that time was leading the geothermal district heating, and well, mostly heating, a little bit of cooling industry. So this graph on the left is from Think Geoenergy, and then this is taken from the IEA report, The Future of Geothermal Energy. But at that time, this graph wasn't available. It was mostly through different data sources I compiled from Chinese sources. But so the picture is clear now, and this remains. And so this informed sort of my research question and direction, which is where will geothermal sit in the US-China relationship as we go forward, as well as implicitly where should it sit and where could it sit if actors had particular motivations, and more broadly, how will international politics shape the development of geothermal technologies in the 2020s and 2030s? So to answer this first question, because I really wanted to bring my research back to something which was topical and relevant and actionable, I had to answer some questions first, which was around what was going on in geothermal in China. So my research covered three areas. First of all, building a narrative of China's geothermal development since the 1970s, understanding the dynamics of that development. For example, how does geothermal compare to other renewables? We've seen solar PV and EV scale up incredibly rapidly because of various structural economic factors. And how far could they also be relevant to China's geothermal scale up? And once I answered the first two, I can begin, which I'm now doing, exploring China's international geothermal cooperation expansion and what it means for example, the US-China relationship. So through this research, I interviewed the chief technical officer of Sinopec Green Energy, the largest geothermal district heating company in China and the world, the Icelandic ambassador to the US, and then several local government officials about the policy dynamics of developing various geothermal energy industries and hot springs. So I want to, rather than trying to run through sort of 55 years of Chinese history, I want to try and share some work in progress, which shows how this research is relevant to the everyday and relevant to the industry, and why people should care about what's happening in China, and perhaps not what we totally expect. So on this slide, I'm outlining how the think tanks and media are beginning to frame the emergence of geothermal particularly in the US. And this year, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace released a report which outlined effectively how geothermal could be a fantastic export for the US to the world, and policy support which is necessary, among lots of other things. And then more recently, I think this was New York Climate Week, so September, October time. The headline slightly paraphrases what Tim Latimer said, but it emphasizes a US answer to Chinese renewable dominance. And together, this reflects a broader narrative that's emerging, I think, and from what I've read and spoken to, that China's geology prevents significant development of EGS and AGS. So there won't be a challenge. This could be a US dominant clean energy export. China's geothermal development in power, I should clarify, lags behind the US. And then next generation geothermal systems can become a US dominated clean energy export. So what my research on China's particularly geothermal power research ecosystem and development slightly challenges or gives nuance to some of this emerging narrative. So geothermal power in China is very, very small. It's about 50 megawatts of capacity. A useful framing for that is in 2024 that was 90, the equivalent of 90 minutes of solar PV expansion. So it's pretty insignificant. However, from interviews with geothermal researchers in China, it became very clear that investment in R&D is increasing rapidly. So ever since 2020, it's increased year on year. So the picture of China being very far behind and not at all any competition on geothermal power is perhaps misled. The second point is that the framing of China versus the US on geothermal doesn't reflect reality. So the US-China, there's been a long-standing US-China relationship on geothermal. It's been mostly kept to the academic level, but it's still thriving and ongoing with very senior members of um, uh, US geothermal power community visiting China and being part of the China geothermal research ecosystem. And in the 90s, and I believe in part of the 2010s, there was some more formal collaboration between the US and China. Definitely in the 90s on geothermal specifically, and then more broadly on geology. And I haven't quite cracked whether that covers geothermal in that instance as well. And then finally, as I alluded to before, the idea that this would become an undisputed US export again doesn't match the reality overseas. So Chinese state-owned enterprises, which is energy state-owned enterprises, largely through which China has an overseas presence, have been in the last 2 or 3 years, expanding their partnerships with local geothermal power developers. And there have been some drilling contracts which have been awarded to Chinese geothermal, to Chinese SOEs to deliver geothermal drilling. So this research, and this is work in progress, slightly gives nuance to some of the narratives around US-China relations on geothermal. And I hope as I spend more time researching this, I can share more of the research and findings through various outlets. Yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michael. Again, as not the geologist as well, there's definitely lots of career opportunities for, folks in the policy space and the education space, administrative space. That's what's so exciting about the geothermal sector is it's just really diverse and it's really something for everyone. So you were definitely speaking more of the policy talk up my alley. It was a little bit easier to follow than some of the other technical stuff, but really appreciate it, and please keep us updated as things progress. I'd love to maybe even set up a call with you separately and talk kind of policy interrelations.
Absolutely.
Lots of
Yeah.
exciting stuff happening. I guess one question for you is, you mentioned the state-owned entities in China and investment or whatever. Is there already any sort of concern around the new tax, like FIAC, foreign entities of a concern restrictions that are happening in the US now, based on the one big beautiful bill language within the tax credits? We were excited and fortunate enough to preserve our geothermal power production tax credits, but there were additional foreign entities of concern restrictions that were kind of placed, which would limit that ability to have these companies that have, China being one of them, have that investment. Is there talk about that?
That's not something I've looked for or seen, so it might be out there. But what I can say on that is that there are Chinese-owned geothermal companies in the US who operate power plants and who can provide full services. So the US and China geothermal industry is actually more integrated than the some of the articles might suggest. And so this framing of US versus China, as always, two of the huge economies with fantastic R&D and researchers are going to be speaking to each other. And also that, from maybe 20 years ago when the relationship was less strained, there was more free movement of money. But that's a really good question, and I don't have an answer to it. But yeah, that's something for me to look at.
Perfect. And then, you know, you showed that great graph of, the extent of the heating and cooling, mainly the heating side of low temp geothermal. What did you discover any, policies or financing tools that in China that you think could be adapted to accelerate that development in the US or elsewhere? Because that's always something that we're looking at, here in the U.S. Just trying to figure out how to support that part of the sector.
Yeah, unfortunately, nothing jumped out on the financing front. I think one of the things which struck me most about how the geothermal low temperature had developed was that I guess there's a sort of stream of thinking around energy innovation that some things you can manufacture and repeat more easily, and that drives down the cost of rolling out and expanding, the technology. So solar PV is an example where you can have in China has sort of a 3 mile long factory where they build everything from A to Z, and the costs have come down enormously. And generally, from what I've read about geothermal, people say that it's very, very hard to repeat and roll out and redeliver. And obviously, that's something which the industry is aspiring to do and to standardize. But that's something which they have managed to do to some extent in China because of the scale they've reached and the shape of the economy and the interconnectedness between the factories and the roads. They can get a drill rig anywhere very quickly. Um, but that's more structural sort of national economics, I think, rather than something which is necessarily transferable to the US. Um, but again, yeah, I'm sure there's a better answer I can look for.
Okay, that was great. Fascinating. Okay, well, I would love, I know we're just at the top of the hour, and I think, as students studying, geothermal, I'd love to invite, the other students to kind of come on camera, and I'd love to ask you all kind of what would be your dream job, based on, some of you are graduating, I think, pretty soon. Some have a couple of years, but if you were to pick your dream job, what would it be? In just a few sentences. So I'll let you think, and whoever is ready to say first, go ahead and go off mute, and I'll call on you. Still thinking. Okay, Daniel, do you know what your dream job would be?
Yeah, so uh, I would like to stay in the geothermal energy space, but I don't know, it depends on the opportunity. So I'm looking at whether to stay in the geothermal energy space or to go into oil and gas energy, space. Yeah. Those are the two I'm looking at the moment.
Okay, we gotta somehow keep you in this realm. Okay, Aaron.
Yeah, similarly, I'm very passionate about geothermal, and I'd love to stay in the space. Being in New York and an East Coaster my whole life, the opportunities are much more limited over here. But I would love to kind of be at the start of maybe something like what Cornell is looking at for something like a direct use system on the East Coast and getting geothermal started over there.
Awesome. Ayat?
Well, definitely I would like to stay in geothermal. I'd like to stay within the geothermal hydraulic fracturing area because, this is my background and I would like to stay in geothermal as well. And being in Utah, I guess, can give me a good chance for working with exploration, hopefully for geothermal. So we'll see.
Perfect. Well, we're happy to maybe make some connections to folks over in Furbo if when you're all ready. So,
Yeah, thank you.
and the slew of other companies that are popping up all around there. There's
Yeah.
some every day. And then last but not least, Michael.
I think something around policy and engagement. So whether that's engaging Europe, the European Union, as they roll out their soon to be announced geothermal strategy, or something much more local around engaging local residents when a geothermal plant is coming to them. I think reading about some of the work in Taiwan and Japan and New Zealand, that's a really important part of the process, and fascinating as well. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. Congratulations again. And just a reminder, we have recorded this and it will be available on our YouTube channel. We will share that out on our social networks and share it with all you folks to share with your friends and family. So thank you all again. And this is an episode of Full Steam Ahead. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.